we've seen how diverse groups and subcultures have formed what is known as the American people. America is a constellation of widely varied cultures on a journey through time. Cultures trying to preserve their special identity while seeking to reap the benefits of the larger cultural pattern of which they are an integral part. Since the beginning of the American experience, these cultures have been in constant contact and quite often in conflict. It is the contact and conflict between these many diverse cultures that bring out what is finest and what is most flawed in the American character. Experience has shown that conflict between cultures can usually be diminished or avoided by knowledge and understanding. Perhaps as the journey of the American people continues toward tomorrow, we will grow to respect each other not only for those traditions and values we share, but for those that make us different one from another.
Culture is everything that mankind does and makes. Everything in the man-made environment. And culture also is a response to challenges in the environment.
You know, when I think of the American people, I tend to think in terms of the fact that everybody in this country came from someplace else, so that the roots go back to many, many different societies and many different cultures.
Most people who we now know as Acadians came from the province of Nova Scotia in the 1750s.
The Cherokees thrived in southeastern United States for about 500 years. It was a land base in North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama.
I have never been able to find out exactly who the first Chinese settler was here, other than that it went back to the early 1900s. My father came over in 1912.
Comanche depended so much upon the buffalo. Once that was gone, no other way could they live as they had been living before.
We have been examining culture, the way of life of a people, and how people throughout the world adapt to changing environments.
The following is a college telecourse based on the textbook Psychology, written by Don and Sandra Hockenberry and published by Worth Publishers.
This is indeed a joyous night for the human spirit. This is your victory too. You helped end apartheid. You stood with us through the transition.
This was Nelson Mandela shortly after he won the presidency of South Africa. As a leader for the African National Congress, he helped bring an end to racial apartheid in that country, a feat for which he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. He has been described as being a great and wise negotiator, idealistic, pragmatic, practical, charming, courteous, attentive, enigmatic, and private. This could be called a description of Nelson Mandela's personality. What does it mean to have a personality? What determines our personality? Are our personalities something we inherit at birth or something we develop through our life experiences? Social scientists have developed many theories to try and determine where personality comes from. Of these theories, there are currently three major ones: psychoanalytic, humanistic, and social cognitive perspectives. We will explore these three theories by applying some of their aspects to a well-known person, Nelson Mandela. How did an extraordinary personality such as Nelson Mandela develop?
When I think of Nelson Mandela, I think of the uniqueness of his life. I can't think of anybody else in world history, any part of world history, who went through the kind of transformation that he went through. He was born in 1918 at a time where he's living in a country in which his own people, black Africans, represented well over 80% of the population. Yet they had virtually no political voice. Mandela himself never voted in a government election until 1994. He was in prison from 1964 virtually continuously till 1990. Yet in his own country in 1990, Africans still did not have the vote. It was as if nothing had changed, and in many ways things had gotten much worse. Yet in a mere 4 years from the moment he stepped out of prison, he was president of the country.
Nelson Mandela emerged from Robben Island as a true hero. He was a symbol, I think, for a long time, and there was really a concern whether, when he came out of Robben Island, his symbolic stature would be tarnished by the reality of life. But he lived up to his hero status and exceeded it, I think, in most people's minds.
Was Nelson Mandela born to be a leader? Or was it the events and circumstances of his life that shaped him?
With regard to personality, it's important to consider the question of heredity and environment. And basically, personality theorists agree across the board that we're all born with some of the elements of personality, but the rest of the elements of personality we learn through our interaction, the interaction that takes place when we express what we're born with, and other people respond to it.
There is no one theory that adequately explains all aspects of human personality. Every theory has its own strengths and weaknesses.
The purpose of studying personality is to understand individual differences. You know, we tend to like to think of people as all the same. We know that's not true, and people are really very different.
One of the most influential figures in the study of human personality was Dr. Sigmund Freud.
Sigmund Freud was a Viennese physician. He lived around the Victorian era from about 1859 to 1939. And basically, he treated a lot of disturbed patients who seemed to have a similar theme in terms of repressed sexuality and conflicts around that repressed sexuality, which was very understandable given the Victorian time.
Psychoanalytic theory was founded by Sigmund Freud, and ultimately he settled on this kind of triumvirate of dividing our psyche into three different sections: the id, the ego, and the superego.
The id is the primitive part of the personality that is present at birth and is totally unconscious. Its drives are irrational, impulsive, and illogical. The ego is the conscious part of our personality that regulates the id and acts as the mediator between the id's instinctual demands and the realities of the outer world. The superego, which develops around the age of 5 or 6, is the further development of the consciousness that places moral and societal controls on the personality. Freud saw personality and behavior as the result of a constant interplay among these conflicting psychological forces. Psychoanalysis stresses the importance of unconscious mental processes.
What set his theory apart was that he developed basically a theory that looked at personality function in terms of a biological development that is stage and linear oriented. And interestingly enough, and these are some of the things that I think are really brilliant of Freud, he formulated that, you know, the development of personality along this very clear biological time schedule.
Freud called this biological time schedule the psychosexual stages of development. He saw the two primary motivating forces for human behavior were sexual and aggressive energies. During the first 5 years of life, the child passes through the oral, anal, and phallic psychosexual stages. The latency stage occurs in late childhood, and the genital stage begins in adolescence.
The mother is the primary object that the infant is attached to at the very beginning. The mother-child bond is a very strong bond, and this is where the child in the oral stage develops things such as security. Both the boy and the girl initially form this bond with the mother. Later on, the father comes in, and the father becomes important in the development of the superego stage. And so the mother and the father interactions with the child are very important in helping the infant form personality tendencies that will occur later in life.
Well, Mandela was one of many children of a father who had 4 wives. The African societies were polygamous, and I don't know the number offhand, but Mandela was the youngest of many children. He had a very tenuous relationship with his father, who was both psychologically and physically distant from him when he was young, and the father died while he was only 9.
One caution I need to say is that it's difficult to really apply theories to people you don't know. I would love to meet Nelson Mandela, but I haven't met him. A lot has been written about him and about his childhood. We don't have the type of rich material that someone from a psychoanalytic framework could really use to make some assessments.
Freud considered mother and father as key figures in being strong determinants in terms of individual differences in personality outcome. All of us, according to Freud, share this, tendency to seek expression of these biological drives in the context of society.
One of the drawbacks of psychoanalytic theory is that it assumes a single mother and a single father. And one aspect of Mandela's life was that he had 4 mothers.
I think that his early childhood experiences helped him a lot with his people skills, and especially, as he notes himself, with his skills with women, because he was the youngest of his father's sons. His biological mother, as well as all of his mothers, lavished a tremendous amount of affection on him, and he traces his ability to communicate very much with not only people in general, but with women in particular to his early experiences.
Each psychosexual stage is associated with certain psychological issues. The oral stage deals with security and insecurity. The anal stage with issues of cleanliness and self-control issues. And the phallic stage deals with control of others. Freud saw each of these stages in association with a cluster of defense mechanisms.
One of the highest levels of defense mechanisms is what we call sublimation. This is where a particular issue is stirred up from one of the psychosexual stages of development, and it is transformed into something that is socially appropriate expression.
Other defense mechanisms include repression, where certain negative thoughts or emotions are completely excluded from one's conscious thought, or denial, which is the failure to recognize the existence of a problem.
In looking at Nelson Mandela's life, he seems to really have concerns for the dignity of others and the dignity of himself. A lot of things I would categorize as control of other issues. So these issues arise from the phallic stage. The way in which this is expressed, I think, is a wonderful, socially appropriate thing. I mean, he's been celebrated for these things, and so he has successfully sublimated those issues.
Mandela says his father had a profound influence on his personality and on his general persona. His father was very tall and, elegant, but much darker than he. But the main thing that he saw in his father, that he saw in himself, was a kind of a stubborn resistance to injustice.
Something I should add here about the era in which he was growing up. At that time, the racial structure in South Africa was not nearly as rigid as it became later, but there was a lot of segregation. a lot of opportunities that were readily open to white residents of South Africa were simply closed to black South Africans.
Many historians of South Africa make a distinction between apartheid and the previous system of segregation. The main point was that the earlier system was, in a way, as racially charged and separatist, but it was much more based on conventions, I would say.
Freud's psychoanalytic perspective on personality remained a dominant force on personality theories until the late 1950s, when it began to be challenged by the emergence of humanism.
The humanistic perspective on personality emerged as a kind of reaction to Freud. Freud's theory of personality, which was more or less the first one in psychology and psychiatry, seemed very pessimistic to humanistically oriented people. It was pessimistic in the sense that people are born selfish, original sin, and can never give that up because it's part of their biology.
The two most important figures who helped us transition from the pessimism of psychoanalysis to the optimism of humanism were Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. Rogers and Maslow emphasized human potential along with self-awareness and free will. One important part of Maslow's and Rogers' theory was that of the fully functioning person.
A fully functioning or self-actualized person would have certain characteristics. That person would trust his own judgment a lot. He wouldn't be looking to other people to know what makes sense. He wouldn't just be the same year after year, be flexible and change a lot. His social relationships would be characterized by intimacy rather than contractuality. Basically, it was a very optimistic, positive view of life.
Carl Rogers felt that life put up roadblocks or prevented us from growth. And so part of his form of therapy was to give what he would call unconditional positive regard.
An example of unconditional positive regard would be that of a parent, while correcting a child's behavior, would do it in such a way that the child would understand that it was the behavior that was wrong and not the child. Thus, the child would be able to learn acceptable behavior without diminishing her feelings of self-worth.
The way I would relate Nelson Mandela to humanistic psychology comes from a quote that I don't have at my fingertip right now. But in essence, what Mandela said was, we do not fear failure. Our greatest fear is that we will succeed far beyond our wildest imagination. And that really is, in essence, the humanistic philosophy. And so I think his overall sense of what an ideal world should be was his driving force. I also think that he had very humanistic notions when he felt that everybody deserved to be treated with dignity. And I've read where he treats other world leaders and servants exactly the same, that he feels that everybody deserves dignity. And in essence, he is practicing unconditional positive regard.
Humanism has had quite an effect recently in the study of personality. Its heyday was in the 60s and 70s, and it certainly had a lot of effect on people in general then. The problem with with humanism is that it just looks on the bright side of things. It just assumes that everything turns out well, whereas we all know from living our own lives that that isn't true.
Well, Rogers put the emphasis on the self-concept as the central factor in human behavior. But in that theory, the self-concept was treated as sort of a global self-image. And those who have continued to work in this area have really tried to break it down into self-conception in different areas of life.
While the humanistic approach emphasizes the fulfillment of a person's unique potential, the social cognitive approach places more emphasis on learning and conscious cognitive processes.
The social cognitive approach actually has its roots in behaviorism. And originally behaviorists felt that it was kind of a stimulus response environment, that the environment gave us the stimulus and we responded to that stimulus. Behaviorists really took that approach because they wanted to only focus on those things that are observable.
One pioneer of the theory of behaviorism was famous American psychologist B.F. Skinner.
Skinner's theory highlighted the importance of the environment in influencing behavior, and then he made some methodological contributions, particularly using the single case design, where you vary environmental conditions and then you observe what effect that has on behavior. But he pushed environmentalism to the extreme, where the assumption was that our behavior is shaped and controlled by the environment.
Although several contemporary personality theorists have embraced the social cognitive approach to explaining personality, probably the most influential has been Albert Bandura.
Albert Bandura, although agreeing with that aspect of behaviorism, also added a piece, and that is the notion of observational learning. That we don't only have to learn by doing, we could learn by observing. So this notion of modeling had come into play. Later on, Bandura also added kind of a cognitive aspect. So his theory is kind of a social learning, social cognitive theory. And he's most famous for something that we call self-efficacy.
I treat self-efficacy as the foundation of human motivation and action. Unless people believe that they can exercise control by their actions, they have little incentive to act or to persevere in the face of difficulties. So whatever other factors may guide and motivate us, they're rooted in the core belief that we have the power to effect change by our actions. Now, human well-being and motivation and accomplishment really rely on an optimistic sense of efficacy.
Social cognitive theory says that the two most important ways of discovering our own efficacy are by actually doing something and through observation.
See, we come with very few inborn skills, and we have a long period of immaturity in which we have to acquire a tremendous range of complex skills. And so what we've evolved is an advanced capacity for observational learning that enables us to acquire competencies vicariously rather than having to go through this tortuous process. This becomes a very critical capacity. We also have the capacity for forethought. We can project into the future and organize our behavior. We set goals, we anticipate consequences to our behavior, we have plans, and this enables us to be self-regulators of our own behavior, and it gives us the capacity for self-directedness.
One of the aspects of Bandura's theory was that quite often we model ourselves after those people who are important to us, those people that we see as being similar to us. Mandela kind of looked at his life and from his recollections of his father. Nelson remembers his father being kind of stubborn and also being very strict. And he said of his father, and this is a quote from his book, Long Walk to Freedom, "He could be exceedingly stubborn, another trait that may unfortunately have been passed down from father to son." He sees these traits of his father's that actually had a great deal of relevance to how he changed a nation.
The first step Nelson Mandela took towards making a difference in his own life was to study law and become a lawyer, one of the few professions open to black South Africans at that time. It was while advocating for the civil rights of his people that he became politically active. Eventually, his political activities resulted in his being arrested.
He was arrested for sabotage and was put on trial for sabotage in a capital offense, and his life was at risk in this trial. Yet during the trial he defended himself, and very eloquently. He used the trial as a platform for expressing African views on the laws in South African society, and was actually allowed to speak at great length. The trial got international coverage, and that's really what made him a world figure, was what he had to say during the trial, even though he knew that by defending himself as he was and not trying to get out of the charges, he admitted the charges, that he would be found guilty and very likely sentenced to death. As it happened, he was sentenced to a life imprisonment.
Once we adopt standards, we tend to do things that give us a sense of self-worth and self-satisfaction, and we refrain from behaving in ways that will bring self-censure. And so often our self-standards conflict with the social pressures for behavior, and in such cases it's not unusual for people to endure hardships or even punitive treatment rather than accede to what they regard as unjust or immoral.
I saw an interview with Nelson Mandela talking about his prison years. And he was sent to like the most austere of the prisons that South Africa had. And yet, even in these conditions, he still carried himself with a sense of dignity, no matter how much the guards would try to abuse him or treat him very poorly. He had this strong sense of self and strong sense that he deserved more. And he also treated the guards with dignity, too. And I think that it was hard for them to treat him with contempt because he treated them with so much respect.
Mandela's ability to influence his environment, even in prison, could be called an example of reciprocal determinism.
Reciprocal determinism simply recognizes two-way causation, that we are producers as well as products of our everyday circumstances.
Nelson Mandela became a world symbol of the oppression of apartheid in his country. After 26 years of imprisonment, he was finally freed. He worked with then South African President F.W. de Klerk to write a new constitution that would allow open elections.
This was the first time in the entire history of the country that there was an election open to everybody. I think the election took place over 2 days and was comparatively peaceful.
While the social cognitive perspective on personality theory is one of the more current theories, it is still evolving. As psychologists and social science researchers continue to learn more about personality, theories will almost certainly change.
Oh, it's gone through many transformations. You see, originally it was heavily oriented in the behavioristic model, and then it's shifted markedly to a more cognitively oriented model. We see people as embedded in social networks, and their development and adaptation and change really involve very complex interactions of different subsystems in a society. So I would say that the major changes are the move in the direction of more cognitively oriented theorizing, and also recognizing the tremendous complexity of human development and change.
Individual functioning is going to be more and more important in the 21st century, and personality theories may help guide us in understanding how that can happen and how to bring it about in child-rearing practices in the schools, things like that.
We can never answer the question, was nature or nurture more influential in the life of Nelson Mandela? But we can address, through personality theories, what roles do nature and nurture play in the development of personality. One thing we are sure of, however, is that Mandela's place in history is unquestionable.
That he was able to emerge as a person who could serve as a catalyst to dismantling the apartheid system and replace it with a government that was able to assume power in an orderly way without dramatic upheavals and bloodshed is extraordinary. And I can't imagine many human beings who could have done what Nelson Mandela did in that culture. So he's a true world hero.
let's go ahead and take it from the top, please, and work basically on our characterization, anything like this that in terms of development that we need here, so we can go ahead and forge on. Okay, black out, curtain opens, rocking.
Land sakes, just listen to that wind. Eh? The wind, Anna, the wind. Eh? Never mind.
The play is in rehearsal. The director and his cast seek to understand the role and motivations of the characters they will play. What makes them act and react the way they do?
Okay, let's play a little bit more with the bed and the least bit tired. Do that out to the audience. So let's take it back to Goose Grease. And Granny, now again, think about the Goose Grease bed.
How does one character react to the expectations of the others? It is just a play. Characters preparing for a performance on stage. But isn't there a larger reality here? In a very real way, we are all actors on a cultural stage, responding to the approval or disapproval of others. We are both performers and creators of societal roles. We learn and act out roles defined by others, and in performing our individual roles, we continually reshape the quality and substance of the play as a whole. How we perform in life, the kinds of characters we are from birth to old age, is largely determined by our responses to the actions and attitudes of others.
Out on an errand of mercy.
Better?
What a good child.
Good.
What a good child. Over to the widow Spleen's place, chopping wood. Good. Oh, that's what I said.
Okay, let's do a thing here. Let's do a little bit of a deal. We're starting.
We are constantly in search of self, seeking to define our role, seeking to discover what kind of characters we are, should be, and can be.
And have the two of you actually do it. You kind of, oh, what a good child, what a good child.
The performance begins here. This is the empty slate of self.
Defining the self is a peculiarly difficult problem. We all know, I think from the time we're 3 or 4, what we mean by self. We know what ourselves are, but it's a very difficult term to define with any sort of precision or elegance. Some people have said the self is the individual as known to the individual. Well, that's not very satisfactory. But perhaps more than thinking of the self as a thing, I would say the self is the individual's ability to get outside of his or her own skin and to look at, I was going to say himself or herself. It's so difficult to define without using the term itself, but to get outside and look at the person who has that name, who has that body, and get some sense of how others are responding to him or her. And you might say that the self arises only in social interaction. We don't have any sense of who we are. We may be a bundle of sensations early on, but as we begin to receive messages from others and as we begin to understand them, because communication is absolutely essential in addition to interaction in the process of developing a self. In the course of interaction with our parents, with brothers and sisters or other caretakers, we hear their comments about what we're doing. We hear our name, for example, and interestingly enough, the child learns its name, addresses itself by its name long before it uses I or me, because those are peculiarly difficult terms to identify since everyone's using them differently. So that, but the child begins to then act out with its dolls, with its toys, the way others have acted toward it. And by taking the role of the other, as we say, it begins to develop a sense of self. Self and society, as one person put it, are twin born. We can't really have a self unless we are part of a society. And when I talked about interaction, it is interaction always, of course, within the definitions of a given society. So that in that sense, and communication is always, of course, a particular mode of language. But it doesn't have to be spoken speech, for example. It can be sign language. It can be any kind of communication system. But societies share such systems, or segments of societies do.
Socialization is a process that begins at birth. What are the primary agents of socialization impacting the child?
Well, by the pre-verbal stage, I think we're talking essentially about the first year or so, and certainly the primary agents of socialization are within the family, most often the mother, but it can be other family members as well, grandmothers, in some instances older siblings, although with infants that's less likely. But the primary agents are those who care for and minister to the child's needs during this period. Touching and holding and love are extremely important for the first year of life in particular. Having a close, warm tie to a nurturing figure. I think most people are familiar with the research that has been done with, first with rhesus monkeys by Harry Harlow, and now many other studies of monkeys and apes in which we see the infant clinging to the mother, and the human infant has the same sort of need to cling, to be held. When you pick up a child who's been fussing, it's easy to see that holding and rocking the child makes a big difference. Love doesn't have to be gushing all over the child, although cooing to the child certainly does no harm, and this is part of human nature. Daycare centers can provide stable, nurturant care, just as a family can, although I think most people would say that for the first year of life, it's probably best if the child doesn't spend more than 20 hours a week, say, in a daycare center, so that it has a lot of interaction with the members of the family with whom it should form its first really strong attachments, a kind of bonding that occurs around 6 months. Now, a daycare center can have, if it has well-trained staff and they care for children, it can be a very good developmental center for the child.
Well, the agents of socialization, certainly first and most important, I would say, is the family. A child's self develops initially in response to the views that others have of him or her, and the parents are the first people that a child encounters. Parents are important in whether a child thinks of himself or herself as a good person or as a bad person, those basic ideas of self. Brothers and sisters are important, friends, teachers, and to a certain extent television in a young child, and showing a child the world beyond its immediate environment. The physical environment is quite important. A child has to feel at home in the world, and the physical environment that it encounters at first is where it feels most at home. When there's a change, for example, a child leaves a home and goes into a children's home, a large institution, that's an important shift, and that difference has an impact. A child living in an institution with tens or maybe even a couple hundred other children has moved into an impersonal environment, becomes acquainted with bureaucracy at an earlier age than most other people do. The physical setting doesn't have the personal touches that a home does. It's a much more impersonal environment, and that has an impact. A child has to learn to live in a crowd. Most children who live with a family in a private home or apartment don't have that experience of living in a crowd, morning, noon, and night. A child goes to school in a crowd, but comes home then to a small group of intimate others. The child in the institution doesn't have that. In the families where there are siblings, in almost all such families, there is sibling rivalry. I think children who grow up in families where the rivalries remain intense and don't get worked out are likely to be somewhat less trusting of other people, somewhat more wary of other people. And I think that's a kind of self that's different from the child who feels that people in his own age range care for him, where friendship and love are more important. Peers and the peer group are extremely important in socialization. I would say there are probably two main reasons for their importance. First, they help the child to become independent of parents. Child is born dependent, has to grow up to become an independent person, and working and playing with peers is important in that. Secondly, learning how to be a friend, learning about friendship and what's involved in friendship and making friends and how you keep a friend and how you lose a friend. Those are fundamental for a person's whole life. Socialization is a two-way process. Parents generally have some ideas about how they want to bring up their child, but children are not inert material like clay. And so parents have to learn to read their child. The child has its own tendencies toward activity, even from birth, right after birth. Later on, children bring into the home information or ideas that they pick up in school or on the street, and that feeds in, and parents have to adapt to those. So that it's not simply a matter of parents saying, this is what we want, these are the rules, this is what you follow, and that it's a smooth process from there.
Very good.
As the individual moves through life, the self is influenced by a continuing parade of human encounters. As one grows older, the range of these encounters widens. At adolescence, suddenly, sometimes bewilderingly, the lid of life pops open like a jack-in-the-box, filled with possibilities and challenges and insecurities. Suddenly, the whole question of who we are becomes enormously important. His name is Tyrek Giddings. Her name is Laura Hernandez. We talked with them about family and peers and the thing we call self.
Describing myself is real difficult because it's hard to look away from yourself and see yourself. I think I'm a generally nice person. I get along with just about anybody, whether I don't like them or not. I see myself as very caring. I care about other people, and I try and be there for everybody, no matter who they are. And I really like myself. I like that in myself. I like seeing that in myself.
Sometimes I feel like my parents, they like me for who I am, and my friends like me for what I am or what I have. I feel like I'm a nonconformist sometimes because, like if they want, like if a new fad comes in and stuff, and everybody goes to that, I might go to that to a certain extent, but I'll make it different so it can stand out. I mean, it'll still be basically the same thing in general, but sometimes it'll be different. You could tell the difference.
The approval of my peers is very important, but it doesn't change the way I live. I don't want to follow everything they say. I want to be happy with myself also. So it's slightly important. My parents' approval is important, but it's important in different ways. I look more for approval with my parents, with my education, with my grades, with my college plans and my career plans. But it's set on a different level than from my peers.
Also, I feel like I'm a nonconformist because, like, my friends, they make their grades okay, but not as good. I mean, I make pretty good grades, you know. I kind of encourage them, push them. Like, they'll say, like, well, Tyrek, he makes pretty good grades. You can go ask him for help, or like, get him to help you or something like that. And they'll call me and they'll ask me, did I do my homework, or they'll ask me, do they need any help? And I help them because they're my friends.
I'm a conformist in some ways, like the style I dress, the style of my dress, and that's basically the music I listen to, just because that's what I see at school every day and with my friends, and that's just something you pick up. But I don't conform in a way to lots of things. I don't go into drugs and stuff like that.
Fundamental shift occurs in adolescence. The peer group becomes even more important than the family. The family remains important and can be a kind of refuge for a teenager who feels that a peer group is pulling him or her in a direction they don't want to go. But most teenagers want to be accepted by a peer group. In a peer group, they find out about important things about themselves. They find out about sexuality. They find out what makes them attractive to others. So the peer group begins to replace the family in importance. And a teenager would rather spend time with friends than with family and parents. Also, in the teenage years, a child is beginning to think about a future kind of work. Sometimes a teacher in high school can be very important, exciting a child about a subject, getting him interested, encouraging his ability and his interest in the subject, so that teachers can play a very important part. Adolescence is considered one of the most crucial periods of socialization because in childhood, children are trying out a variety of different things. What kind of person to be, have many fantasies, and so on. In adolescence, they have to begin to make commitments. You leave high school, what are you going to do? You have to make a life for yourself. And so that in adolescence, a firm identity begins to crystallize. A life direction begins to be set. For at least 100 years, adults have been concerned about the impact of the mass media on children and teenagers. 100 years ago, the concern was with newspapers. 40 years ago, comic books were thought to be a bad influence. 20 years ago, there was a lot of focus on television as a bad influence. And nowadays, popular music, which is probably the most important of the media for teenagers, there's a lot of concern about. Music, popular music, discs, tapes, MTV, and so on, in its various forms, it's very important to teenagers. It deals with their concerns, rebellion against authority, again, sexuality, what's good, what's evil, things that are of great concern. Listening to music is very important in helping them deal with these issues. They talk about the music. In addition, they often get an intense high at a concert of their favorite performers, and there's a sense of solidarity with their own generation, all the people who are listening at that concert. But it's not possible to say categorically that music or any of the other media has a good effect or a bad effect. It's just too complicated.
It is said that our basic personality is formed in the very early years of our life, and for better or worse, we are who we are by our 21st year. But this does not seem to be the case. Our responses to the world around us change as we grow older. New agents of socialization enter our lives.
The primary agents of socialization in adulthood are much more widely diffused than the primary agents in the early years. I would say that anyone with whom one interacts closely one's colleagues at work, particularly one's husband or wife, one's close friends, they're all socialization agents. So also, for that matter, are the media. We learn about our society and what's going on in it and what we need to do, partly through the media. Sometimes we get into problems and we need to be straightened out, and we go to therapists. They're socialization agents too. Also, I think we should not forget the individual self. That we decide that there are things that we want to do, that we need help on here or there. We turn, but we set objectives for ourselves, and in a sense, then adult socialization entails participation of ourselves much more actively than earlier socialization. As we grow older, we learn that our children sometimes know a good deal more than we do about what's going on in the society now. It may be, first of all, in music. It may be in terms of what they're learning in science courses. They're continually able to tell us about some of the changing patterns in the society. I think we all recognize, those of us who had children at the period of Vietnam, whose children were coming along, say, in adolescence, I think they taught the older generation a good deal about what was happening and the meaning of what was happening in Vietnam. So that the two-way street becomes much more a, let's say in the middle years, even passage in both directions. But I would say that parents may have a tremendous influence right through the life course. Recently, a lawyer who was 65 years old told me that the strongest influence on his whole life up to that point was his father, who had just died at 91. And he was still doing things the way that his father suggested, so that we don't completely disappear as socialization agents. The question of whether the socialization process ever ends, I think, is easily answered if we grant that individuals never stop learning. We always have the capacity to learn a little more. That means that others have the capacity to teach us more. So socialization can go on throughout the life course. As to whether the self is ever complete, if one thinks of the self as a thing, as an object, we have to think of it then as a constantly changing object, because I would say we're continually looking at ourselves and realizing that there were capacities that we didn't know we had, or inadequacies that we didn't know we had. Our self-image continues to change. I wouldn't say that at any point the self becomes complete. I would say that the self is always in flux, and I prefer to think of the self in a sense as a process rather than as a thing. And that process keeps unfolding, as it were. I would say that in the last chapters of our lives, we're probably influenced more by who we are at that point, who we have become, by virtue of our life experience and earlier socialization. But it's perfectly true that if we're in a nursing home, we're going to need to be oriented to the nursing home. We're going to need to know something about what our expectations are, and there the medical staff and our fellow patients can be very helpful to us. In dealing with the end of one's life, others can perhaps be helpful in showing us the way, but sometimes the dying person can themselves help to socialize others to dying with dignity, you might say. One of my friends who recently died was such an example, that the physician who had attended him and the nursing staff all said that with his death and the way that he went and his attentiveness to them, they all had a new concept of what it was to die with dignity.
If we are a creation of society, why then should we be concerned with the kind of person we are becoming? After all, we are powerless in the process. We are simply clay in the hands of others. We are shaped by our encounters with parents and peers and the media, a product of their influence, praise, condemnation, and expectations. Fortunately, socialization does not offer such a gloomy prospect as this. It is not a closed process in which we play no part. Although the self is a social creation, we are still unique and special individuals with the freedom of self-expression, and we, in turn, create and continually recreate our society. We are both the clay and the sculptor. Although the work of art is shaped by the sculptor, the finished piece has a life and an individuality of its own. We are shaped by the people around us, yet each of us becomes an original, unrepeatable, irreplaceable individual. And because we live, society and the course of history are forever changed.
Defining the self is a peculiarly difficult problem. We all know, I think from the time we're 3 or 4, what we mean by self. We know what ourselves are, but it's a very difficult term to define with any sort of precision or elegance. We can't really have a self unless we are part of a society. Touching and holding and love are extremely important for the first year of life in particular. Having a close, warm tie to a nurturant figure.
A child has to feel at home in the world, and the physical environment that it encounters at first is where it feels most at home. Peers and the peer group are extremely important in socialization.
Sometimes I feel like my parents, they like me for who I am, and my friends like me for what I have.
The approval of my peers is very important, but it doesn't change the way I live.
A fundamental shift occurs in adolescence. The peer group becomes even more important than the family. The family remains important. It can be a kind of refuge for a teenager who feels that a peer group is pulling him or her in a direction they don't want to go.
The primary agents of socialization in adulthood are much more widely diffused than the primary agents in the early years. I would say that anyone with whom one interacts closely, one's colleagues at work, particularly one's husband or wife, one's close friends, they're all socialization agents. I would say that in the last chapters of our lives, we're probably influenced more by who we are at that point, who we have become, by virtue of our life experience and earlier socialization. If we grant that individuals never stop learning, we always have the capacity to learn a little more, that means that others have the capacity to teach us more. So socialization can go on throughout the life course.
This is PBS.
Americans are brash and bold, inquisitive and independent, strong and sassy.
What the hell are you talking about?
But are we also rude?
Hey, excuse me, would have been next there. You can win your turn, okay?
Over the last 30 years, manners, common courtesy, honest service, and good taste have seemed to all but disappear in our everyday lives. Our willingness to push the envelope of socially acceptable behavior has changed vocabulary, respect for authority, trust of one another, and our willingness to lend a helping hand.
Come on, I've been waiting
In
here.
this program, we'll examine the erosion of decorum and look at the many effects it has on both personal and public life in the United States. Do we still follow the golden rule, or are we too busy and too harried to care about anyone but ourselves? This is today's life choices, challenges for our times.
Stupid!
Everywhere you look, rude, crude, and obnoxious behavior rules the day. On television talk shows, guests scream and shout at one another while a host tries to moderate the mayhem. On radio, shock jocks try to outdo each other's lewd remarks.
Oh, I believe I have coffee running out of my nose.
In sports, highly paid superstars trash talk their opponents and verbally abuse officials, coaches, even their fans. Slogans unfit for print in any respectable newspaper are emblazoned across bumper stickers and t-shirts. Store clerks are arrogant, and customer service is an oxymoron. On the highways, drivers ignore the rules of the road, endangering lives. What in the world is going on? Stephen Carter serves as the William Nelson Cromwell Professor of Law at Yale University. His recent book, Civility, Manners, Morals, and the Etiquette of Democracy, has helped shape the current national debate on the role of respectful behavior in our daily lives.
When I think about civility, I think about the sum of all the sacrifices that we make for the sake of living together in a common society. A society relies on sacrifices, and one of the problems in America today is that people, by and large, don't want to make any.
There's no doubt Americans have become much more self-centered over the past 2 generations. Instant gratification and the aggrandizement of self are the order of the day. Many Americans want what they want now, and they often don't care who they offend, hurt, or disobey to fulfill their desires. Whatever it is they're looking for, a corner office with a window, a car sleeker than their neighbors, a lucrative job, or just a prime parking space, they are often willing to overlook common courtesy, safety, and honest work to make it theirs.
Come on, thanks a lot.
At Johns Hopkins University, Pierre Forni, a professor of Italian literature and culture, has organized the Civility Project, which includes research, seminars, and courses on civility.
To be civil is not easy. It has never been easy, even in other generations. Because in order to be civil, to be polite, you do have to make an effort, actually 3 efforts. First is an effort in imagination. Again, you have to be able to imagine the discomfort, the hurt of others. Second, you have to care about that discomfort, about that possibility of hurting that all we have. And third, you have to be willing to act upon that caring. So it's a rather complex process, and it takes willpower, and it takes the willingness to take action. This has never been easy. It needs some kind of moral energy.
Manners and civilization have almost always been linked. The Talmud discussed such topics as burping, yawning, and bad breath. Famous thinkers and philosophers, Aristotle, Burke, Cicero, Erasmus, Emerson, Locke, and Plato all had something to say about behavior. And the 10 Commandments may rank as the ultimate how-to list. In the 20s, Emily Post made manners fashionable with her often consulted book, Emily Post's Etiquette. Her great-granddaughter-in-law, Peggy Post, has continued the tradition by writing an etiquette column for Good Housekeeping and Parents Magazine, as well as the 16th edition of Emily Post's Etiquette.
It's been said that etiquette greases the wheels of our society or of our civilization. What these guidelines do is help us get through our lives and our days in a smoother fashion instead of in a more cumbersome fashion. So it gives us answers. Etiquette gives us answers on some smart ways of interacting.
Getting along with each other is a basic tenet of a thriving society. People can practice common decency on their own, or a government can try to mandate it.
Now, we have two systems to regulate associated life. One is the system of civility, and one is the system of the law. Now, the more accomplished we are, the more accomplished we become in using the system of civility, the less we will have to have recourse to the system of the law. It's like preventive medicine on the one hand and using antibiotics on the other hand. It's wonderful to have an antibiotic if you have an infection, but isn't it better try not to get the infection in the first place? It is wonderful to have the law that can help us if we engage in a conflict, if we find ourselves in a conflictual situation and somebody gets hurt. But isn't it better to have the skills that will allow us not to get into that conflictual situation? A system that will help us minimize the opportunities for conflict to develop.
Some cultural historians believe manners first began to erode during the 18th century, as proponents of Romanticism viewed standards of civility with contempt. The rejection of the formality of late Victorian manners has continued over the last several centuries. In the United States, rebels, outcasts, and others who bucked the status quo have shaped our cultural and political history. Most Americans have long scoffed at the stuffiness of royal etiquette and protocol, labeling it rules for the rich. But some Americans are now saying that by tolerating almost all forms of aggressive and selfish behavior, we've crossed the line of responsibility, integrity, and respectability. A recent poll by U.S. News and World Report and Bozell Worldwide reported that 9 out of 10 Americans think incivility is a serious problem. And nearly 80% of those surveyed said the problem has worsened over the past 10 years.
I think we're at a moment now when a lot of people are wondering how to reverse what's going on, this decline of civility, the decline of caring, the decline of a sense of obligation. And the very fact that a lot of people are worried about it is good evidence that we may be able to do something about it.
Nicholas Mills, a professor of American Studies at Sarah Lawrence College, is the author of The Triumph of Meanness.
There's a really kind of an ugliness that's going on, and a notion that this ugliness somehow is business as usual, that we need to be tough and that we need to be competitive. I think what's really interesting that often the rhetoric we used in the old days of the Cold War against the Soviet Union is the very rhetoric we now use against our own population.
Although we now live in the age of political correctness, everyday language is often harsh, disrespectful, and crude.
The fact that freedom is the central word in American political and philosophical vocabulary. Freedom is the defining quality of the Americans. To be American means to be free. And so this importance for American identity, this importance of freedom for the forging of an American identity, certainly has consequences on everyday behavior and certainly has consequences when it comes to the levels of informality that one can reach in this country, even with somebody one doesn't know very well.
The American casual, informal approach to everyday living often creates an open and friendly atmosphere. Many think the relaxation of workplace dress codes has removed the barriers between employers and employees and reduced the number of socioeconomic cliques. But others think those laid-back attitudes may encourage new levels of disrespect and lower the bar on politeness. On a positive note, students no longer fear their teachers, and employees may view their bosses as friends. But that familiarity may also encourage another challenge to authority.
When Americans think that politeness and manners reinforce hierarchical social stratification, differences between classes, social classes, well, the words, the notions take on a negative connotation. When, on the other hand, Americans associate politeness and manners to the civil society, to civic responsibility, to taking a responsibility for one's position in the community, working for the well-being of the community, being aware of the needs of the community and giving of oneself for the well-being of the community, then politeness, manners, and civility have a positive connotation.
Many Americans feel overwhelmed by the level of nastiness in their everyday lives. Strangers rarely exchange friendly greetings or smiles. Store clerks are often surly. Shoppers cut in line or push others aside to grab their items. And able-bodied drivers park in handicapped slots or no parking zones. Americans certainly can't escape rude behavior on the nation's streets and highways. Road rage has become the social ill du jour, but statistics indicate the problem is all too real. A study by the American Automobile Association says that the rate of aggressive driving incidents has risen by 51% since 1990. Dr. Arnold Nirenberg is a Los Angeles psychologist who is affiliated with the American Institute for Public Safety.
Aggressive driving has three types. You have breaking the rules, such as somebody going through a red light, going through a stop sign, not yielding when they're supposed to yield, and the sign indicates that. That's one type, breaking the rules. A second type is lack of courtesy, like, for instance, going too slowly in a fast lane, the left-hand lane, or not let somebody merge in front of you even though they've caught your eye and asked permission to get in front. So that would be a second category of aggressive driving. The third category of aggressive driving is what I call angry driving.
According to Nirenberg, there are two kinds of angry driving, vehicular and distractive. The first uses the vehicle to express anger to the other driver by tailgating or cutting him off. The second results from the driver using obscene gestures, screaming, beeping the horn, and other activities that distract him from safe driving. The U.S. Department of Transportation estimates that 2/3 of the 250,000 traffic fatalities since 1990 were at least partially caused by aggressive driving.
The most dangerous thing that our viewers or anybody in this country will face in their lifetime, the most dangerous activity that anybody will perform is just getting into their car. That is the most dangerous activity in America today.
Anonymity, of course, is one of the reasons for rude conduct. The other one is stress, and when you have the combination of stress and anonymity, that's a volatile combination that can really mean trouble. And you have that combination, for instance, in road rage incidents, in which you have somebody who is stressed by the drive home, who is in a hurry to get to work.
Americans also live in fear of one another. We're afraid of strangers, so we avoid eye contact and refuse to say hello or even smile to those we don't know.
We've become a nation where we more and more shrink back into our individual selves with fewer and fewer connections to other people. And if I have no serious connection to another person, then what possible reason is there for me to be polite to that other person? It's that sense of being connected to others that I think we have to restore in American life.
Nicholas Mills thinks many Americans are rude because they're snobbish and elitist. The separation between the haves and the have-nots has widened, and the affluent feel no need to close the gap.
We see, in essence, an upper middle class and a wealthy class that has deliberately separated themselves from the commonality of American life. They've done it in terms of schools, they've done it in terms of lower taxes, they've done it in terms of walled-in neighborhoods and walled-in apartment houses.
Too many Americans think the rules don't apply to them because of their wealth or social status. Many businesses and professions have reinforced that attitude by promoting lying, cheating, and even stealing as necessary survival tactics. That win at all costs belief dominates almost every facet of American life.
The golden rule really is what etiquette is all about, and it's doing what you think the other person would want, putting yourself in that other person's shoes, at least being considerate, being aware of the other person, not necessarily putting that other person ahead of yourself, but taking the whole equation and interacting in a way that's going to make you both feel as good as possible. Sometimes there are no perfect answers to some situations that people get themselves into, but then it's important to be able to talk it through and communicate and try to be fair and come up with a solution.
But in today's culture, bad behavior seems to be everywhere and is often celebrated or rewarded. Many celebrities have cashed in on their illicit deeds and captured our attention.
I don't think we distinguish much these days between celebrity and heroism, or celebrity and fame, and I think that's a very confusing kind of lesson to hand out.
Television talk shows have also contributed to the increased tolerance of vulgarity and shameless, guilt-free behavior. On these programs, people from all walks of life air their dirty laundry in exchange for 15 minutes of fame.
It's television with humiliation as entertainment. And that really, I think, is part of the meanness. That is, what makes meanness so serious in this country is that it's not simply an artifact of bad manners. The meanness really is part of a much larger sort of, I think, economic and racial assault on fundamental kinds of decency and egalitarianism that have been part of our history for a very long time.
Even political talk shows and so-called public affairs programs often encourage and promote discourse and debate peppered with shouting and uninvited interruptions. According to the U.S. News and World Report survey, more than 50% of Americans blame rock music and talk radio for the decline in civility. The advertising we see also stimulates a climate of rudeness.
People are very complicated. We rarely act out of one motive only. I think all of us have a good side and a bad side to which it's possible to appeal. Advertising often appeals to our bad side. You know, buy this car or this brand of makeup or even this brand of beer, or you're not as good a person, you're not as exciting a person as you would otherwise be. This sends the message that life is really about me and getting what I want.
In their drive to make a profit, some of the country's most established and conservative corporations have embraced aggressive, in-your-face advertising.
So although individualism is not bad in itself, we've become a nation of self-seeking individuals, which is bad. And there are very few forces left in America today that are going to ask us to change that, because so much of American life rests now on reinforcing our vision that we're simply individuals who should be seeking our own desires.
The lack of civility and respect for others has hit American schools particularly hard. The lack of discipline in the classroom is often overwhelming, as teachers and school administrators feel powerless to enforce codes of conduct. Fear of a lawsuit often prevents teachers and schools from taking disciplinary action. Arnold Nuremberg says parents are mostly to blame.
The real problem in the educational system is not, whether you have 20 or 30, even 40 children in a class, or whether the roof leaks or not. The real number one issue, those are issues, but the number one issue is that there's not proper respect for the teacher. If there were proper respect for the instructors, they would get a good education. And why is there not that? Why is there not proper respect for the instructors and the teachers? It's because there was a breakdown of showing proper respect to the parent.
Most public schools have been forced to abandon an educational curriculum that incorporates values for fear of being labeled right-wing, conservative, or biased. In many public school systems, teachers are barred from discussing morals and labeling behaviors appropriate or inappropriate.
Now, it's harder to teach things like that in schools now because we have all this idea out there that says we can't agree on morality, values are too complicated, and so on. And I just don't think that's true. There are some issues that are divisive, like abortion, but the schools don't have to teach a right answer about abortion, but we can teach a right answer about should we steal or not? Should we respect our elders or not? Should we respect the property and persons of others or not? There are an awful lot of things in which we have very wide agreement, and we shouldn't let our disagreement on some big political issues screen out our much larger agreement on a vast number of moral issues that are consistent across American regions and across American religious traditions.
Still, most Americans think parents' laissez-faire attitude toward discipline has contributed to the current climate of incivility. The U.S. News and World Report study said 76% of Americans think adults' willingness to keep their children under control has weakened in the past decade.
Parents need to come to the understanding that what the child needs in life is what matters. It's actually very damaging to the child to allow them to be disrespectful. So as parents understand that this is damaging to the child, as they understand this more and more, they'll begin to show more and more the manifestations of correcting their children for showing disrespect to them. But it must always be in the context of showing love to the children, because strict discipline, if there's not a loving context, can really appear brutal. And so it has to be in the context of a loving relationship.
Many experts think the breakdown of the traditional family has also contributed to the disappearance of manners, etiquette, and decorum. In families where both parents work, mom and dad often don't have the time, energy, or interest to insist on good manners in their children.
We're not going to redo the structure of the American family so that suddenly all the men are in the workforce and all the women are in the home again. That's simply not going to happen. What we have to ask ourselves as a society then is that given that the family structures are changing, what are we as Americans collectively prepared to do to replace the kind of role modeling and teaching that used to take place in that setting?
Experts also like to blame politicians and government officials for the lack of civility and respect in our society. Over the last several years, local, state, and federal campaigns have been characterized by negative ads. Plus, some politicians say only what they think viewers want to hear.
You don't have any major political figure to say today, and what you have very few, even prominent religious figures saying today, is that we ought to be characterized by self-restraint and self-discipline, that sometimes there are desires that we ought not to fulfill, that indeed the decision whether to fulfill a desire or not is a moral decision, and that's true whether it's a desire for a larger car or for more sex. Whatever the desire may be, each choice we make is a moral choice, and we need to construct a world in which we as individuals have sufficient moral fiber that we can make those choices in a morally sensible way.
Congressional gridlock is legendary, and most Americans are fed up with seemingly senseless partisan politics. Plus, many think journalists have become hypercritical of public leaders. Reporters assume every statement is either self-serving or inaccurate. While elected officials should be held up for scrutiny, many think the media thrives on missteps and miscues.
When politics is covered principally as what is the latest scandal this week, that promotes, I think, in Americans more of a sense of cynicism, less of a sense of connection to others, because a lot of our connections come through politics for better or worse. And that promotes this sense that, well, I better just retreat and get what I need to get, have the things I want to have, and let that be the end of it.
Nearly all Americans agree that the decline in civility is eating away at our society's moral fabric. Americans often feel no sense of obligation to their neighbors, their community, or their government. The "it's not my problem" attitude permeates all racial and socioeconomic classes. But few can agree on how to restore or even establish standards of good behavior. New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani has tried to make his city's infamously ill-mannered citizens more polite by adopting a zero-tolerance stance on traffic infractions and public nuisance violations. And some think church leaders need to re-establish themselves as moral leaders and take a more active role in reprimanding bad behavior.
One of the most important things is for religious institutions in America to take a leading role in trying to persuade us, all of us, that there is more in life than simply going out to grab for what we want. There's more in life than simply fulfilling our needs and desires, which is what our individualistic culture, primed by capitalism, fueled by advertising, and helped along by constitutional rights.
Each generation establishes its own modicum of behavior, what people will judge as acceptable and tolerable.
The standards for politeness and the standards for civility are always in a flux. They never remain in place, and every generation defines politeness, defines civility in a different way.
And as rude as many think this generation is, most young people have a healthy new respect for the environment and an increased acceptance of minorities. Still, adding new standards doesn't necessarily mean the old ones go out the window. 90% of Americans say incivility is a serious problem, but 99% consider their own behavior as civil. The real answer to our nation's bad manners, foul mouths, poor service, and road rage may lie within each individual American. Critically examining our own behavior and realizing its effect on others would go a long way towards allowing us to inspire goodness toward each other.
Every adult, but particularly every prominent adult, every adult's prominent in a child's life, shares the obligation to try to comport himself or herself in a way that says to a child, this is how adults behave. This is what it means to be a grown-up. This is right behavior. This is the way that we act in order to keep a functioning society in which people are connected to each other, in which we don't lose sense of our obligations to others, in which we learn to behave with our great range of choices in a way that reflects good moral judgment and strong self-restraint.
Hold up your hand. Look at my hand. Do you see the differences?
In a perfect world, we wouldn't. But this is not a perfect world.
They said that I'm ugly because my skin is different from theirs. It's like you take a needle and you just stab it right in someone's heart.
Nobody's helping you. In the final analysis, bigotry destroys all of us.
Where does it come from? Are any of us immune? A provocative look at the roots and the costs of prejudice.
As far as society is concerned, I'm just a nigger.
For some, it's loud and angry, but others never know it's there. We'll take you through a test that probes the subconscious, where bigotry often hides.
What would you imagine your score might indicate?
Tests taken by adults and children.
Is this a good or bad boy most of the time? Good boy.
Black and white. Which race will they prefer? The results often surprised even them.
I'm flabbergasted.
And you'll get a chance to test yourself online. If someone asked, are you prejudiced? What would you say? Are you ready for some tough answers? How biased are you? Hello, I'm Forrest Sawyer. The images of bigotry. Ugly as they are also easy to read. You're not hiding your feelings when you're wearing a white hood. But prejudice doesn't always live out in the open. It can quietly take root in the hearts of people who would never dream of uttering a racial slur. How does it happen? Tonight, we'll explore some answers, and you'll get a chance to test your own bias online. We'll learn the surprising results of tests given to adults and even children, who, as you'll see, may know far better than any of us about the high cost of bigotry.
Prejudice means something like prejudging somebody from their looks, their tradition. Saying bad things about people's race, how they look, what they wear. My advice is not to judge at first glance. Try to meet the person first and then make your judgment.
If you see somebody that looks different.
Bias and prejudice, seen through the eyes of these fourth graders at the Washington, D.C. International School. Even at the age of 10, it has made its mark.
It's like you take a needle and you just stab it right in someone's heart. And that's it. It just hurts.
Prejudice cuts deep into the heart of our society, for children and adults. But so often, it's hard to see because it's hidden, even in our everyday behavior.
Is that the blazer?
But when it's captured on hidden camera, prejudice becomes all too obvious. In this investigation, 2 women, one black and one white, went shopping in various stores, both wearing hidden cameras. In 8 out of 12 cases, the white shopper was treated better than the black shopper.
Yes, please.
The sales clerk asks the white shopper to show her driver's license in order to accept her check. Meanwhile, the black shopper is required to provide much more identification to write her check.
Would you have a credit card also?
I don't believe I brought my credit card with me. Do you need a credit card?
For a check, we usually require a driver's license and a credit card.
That's your store policy?
Yes. Take them?
While the white shopper's check was accepted with only a driver's license, it was a totally different story for the African-American shopper.
Kind of is, right?
That's correct.
She had to provide her license and a credit card, and stand waiting while her documents were closely scrutinized. In another hidden camera investigation with 2 male shoppers, again one black and one white, we found that in most cases, each was treated very differently. As the video shows, the white shopper is given free rein of the CD case, but the store clerk forbids the black shopper from opening the case and insists on handing him each CD.
Yeah, just tell me which one you want to see and I'll pull it out for you.
In another store, again, differing treatment. The black shopper here is followed into the dressing room.
Sir? Everything that goes in the dressing room to come.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is that store policy?
Yeah, it is.
The white tester was allowed to take as many items as he wanted into the dressing room and was never asked to count them. In the end, the experience of working as a shopping tester revealed that nothing spoke more loudly than the color of his skin.
It tells me very clearly that none of my past experience matters. It doesn't matter that I've been educated. The fact that I served in the military doesn't matter. None of these things matter. As far as society is concerned and a number of these store employees, I'm just a nigger.
Again and again in these investigations, we found examples of prejudice. Take this scenario. 2 men trying to hail a cab in New York City, one black, one white. Watch as the taxi bypasses the African-American man and goes right to the white passenger. In this case, the black tester is refused a ride up to Harlem, but just a few yards ahead.
132nd after that?
The white tester gives the same destination to the same taxi driver and is given a ride. In these surveillance tests, we found about a quarter of the time our African-American passenger was passed up in favor of the white one. Whether shopping in stores or hailing a cab, the negative effects of prejudice still burn at the edges of our society. When we look back in time, though, we find prejudice wasn't always as hard to see.
When you hate another human being, when you hate another culture, when you hate another race, when you hate another ethnicity, it really corrodes the moral fabric of the entire society.
The American experience, it is...
Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, professor at DePaul University, author and ordained minister, has devoted his life to studying issues of race.
Throughout the globe, ethnic cleansing, ethnic bigotry, racial prejudice, and the inability to acknowledge the fundamental humanity of the other crops up in vicious and lethal ways.
Some of the earliest societies showed forms of prejudice. In the last half-century, mankind shuddered at the horror of genocide. During World War II, in Hitler's concentration camps, 6 million Jews were exterminated, along with thousands of gypsies, homosexuals, and people with disabilities. In the past century, the world has reeled again and again at barbarous acts of hatred.
The Bosnian government today revealed details of an alleged mass execution.
America's own short history is littered with acts of bias.
I think racism corrupts the spirit of people. It's a deep hurt, and then that hurt becomes anger.
Harold Littlebird is a Native American poet, painter, songwriter. His people treated as subhuman by white colonialists who took their land.
Just imagine you're living in a place where you've always lived, and then all of a sudden you're told that you cannot no longer go to those places, and you're being forcefully removed.
White settlers tried to destroy the Indian culture, outlawing their languages and traditions.
How can we heal the heart when it's been hurt by prejudice and racism and all of that stuff that man does to man?
It's a question that resonates throughout our history, from the shameful treatment of Native Americans to the government-sanctioned institution of slavery.
Slavery was the attempt of one group of people to dominate another group of people so thoroughly that they owned not only their bodies, but that they controlled their souls and minds.
Even today, 137 years after slavery was outlawed, many African Americans say they are still treated as inferior.
We don't have the beatings anymore per se like we used to, but let's change it over to something that's to intimidation and humiliation.
It's something that Raymond Young and Anna Hunt understand. Both in their late 70s, they live in this Washington, D.C. retirement home and remember the terror of white supremacists, cross burnings, lynchings.
Growing up in the South as a young black man was a lot of devastation for me. It was bloodshed.
When I was going to school, there was a young man that was in my class. He was accused of saying something, or it had something to do with a white woman, and he was lynched. He was killed by a group of white men.
Between 1862 and 1964, nearly 5,000 lynchings took place in America. For Raymond and Anna, 7 decades have not erased the daily indignities, and now they fear for future generations.
My friend was called something really bad by a boy. He called her a nigger. He said that I'm ugly because my skin is different from theirs. Because they're kind of brown, and I was a little yellowish, darkish, and they didn't really like me just because I look different from them.
Fear of those differences still plague us, with hate crimes making the headlines.
Matthew Shepard died from a severe beating. 3 children and 2 adults are shot.
White supremacists have targeted homosexuals, Asians, Jews, and other ethnic groups. One of the more gruesome crimes was the dragging death of a black man in Texas named James Byrd.
The murder so gruesome, it has shocked the small East Texas town of Jasper.
I'm glad I'm not dead, that's all.
In 1991, a black motorist named Rodney King was dragged from his car and beaten by Los Angeles police officers. No one would have known his name if the incident had not been caught on tape and the policeman brought to trial.
Not guilty of the crime of assault.
After the jury found the officers not guilty, an outraged community took to the streets. Today, many black and Hispanic men still fear the police because they feel they are being profiled because of their race. 18-year-old Michael Tyner says he's been stopped by police 7 times for no reason. Once, he claims, 4 officers pulled a gun on him. Michael believes it's because he's a young black man and fits a certain profile.
I'm like an A student, you know, I'm going to college next year, but yet they still look at me and be like, oh, he's a criminal. I mean, it's not fair.
But can we get beyond this, and how?
In the final analysis, bigotry destroys all of us. It doesn't just destroy black people. It doesn't just destroy Asian Americans. It destroys all of us. What hurts one hurts all. And what cements all of us, what brings us all together, keeps us going in a way and in a fashion that really represents the best of the American dream.
It would be very nice if people just acted kind to each other, respect each other, even though they look different.
Take a look at my hand. We bleed the same. We have 5 fingers. We are the same 5-fingered clan. on this planet. No difference. It's when people start to make those differences out of fear that's the root of prejudice.
Testing the differences, the biases that hide inside the mind.
What would you imagine your score might indicate? I'm kind of scared to find out, actually.
When How Biased Are You continues. Many people take comfort in their belief that they themselves are not prejudiced. But many times prejudice is subconscious. We don't even realize it's there. But there is a test, in fact, a scientific one, that can help us learn about our hidden biases. Tonight, you'll meet a number of people who have agreed to take a test that might show that they have some hidden prejudice. In some cases, the results were reassuring. In other cases, very troubling and surprising. Here's Sarah James.
Ready? Go.
Right.
Could a dizzying series of images and word associations reveal racial preferences you never knew you had? Could these blurry images reveal much more about you than you ever wanted anyone else to know?
I should warn you now, this isn't the same order.
These two psychologists designed the test and say that's exactly what the experiment does. And they say you'll understand exactly how once you watch it closely.
We're going to start now.
Here's how the experiment works. In the center of the screen are two boxes. The left box marked bad, the right marked good.
The images are going to be changing.
But that's not all. As you're about to see, the psychologists include either a white face or a black face in each box.
Ready? Go.
Left.
Now the challenge. Alternating words and faces appear around the perimeter, a new one every split second. And each time, the test taker must decide if the word or face goes with the left box or the right.
Left.
It's a lightning-quick test to see whether the associations we make about race are so strong that they overpower the correct answers. For instance, we would normally associate the word friend with the word good. But is it possible some of us have trouble making this association when a black face is also linked with good? The results can be surprising.
That's certainly a lot to think about. We find that frequently. Some people are disturbed by their results.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, here it is.
Let's see how Rhonda fares. In the first half of the test, she's told to associate negative words and black faces with the left box, positive words and white faces with the right.
Left, right.
For instance, the word war appears. She correctly links it to the left box, which says bad and has a black face. Then there's a black face. Once again, the left box.
Left, right. Left, right.
She just as easily links the word peace to the right box, marked good with a white face.
Right.
And when a white face flashes onto the screen, Rhonda also matches that with the right box.
Right.
For Rhonda, this half of the test is a breeze. She never makes a mistake.
Left.
Okay, very good. Now, we'll give you the other one.
But let's see how she does when the information is reversed, when the left box, marked bad, has a white face, and the right box, labeled good, has a black face.
Left.
Suddenly the test becomes much more difficult for Rhonda. About a third of the way through, she makes a mistake, linking the white face to the right box, even though that shows a black face.
I lost it.
Okay.
Has Rhonda stumbled because she unconsciously associates white with good?
What would you imagine your score might indicate?
Well, I could tell when I was taking it, I had so much of an easier time doing the white with good, much to my dismay, that I'm sure I'm showing a preference. I don't know how strong, and I'm kind of scared to find out, actually.
In fact, the test is showing a strong preference for whites.
It's upsetting, but as I said before, I'm not surprised. And I think it's because we live in an extremely racist society where messages are given to us in many different ways.
We may not be as impartial as we think we are.
Absolutely.
In fact, chances are we're not.
Chances are we're not.
We all might be prejudiced in ways we're not aware.
Mazarin Banaji of Yale University and Anthony Greenwald of the University of Washington created this test.
What do you think this test reveals that perhaps we didn't know before?
How fair are we being when we judge a person?
Okay.
Let's take a look at what happens with Betsy, an events planner.
Wait, let me get my lefts and my rights.
Okay.
I like this better, but okay.
On this part of the test, when bad is associated with a black face and good is associated with a white face, Betsy sails along with no difficulty.
You say when.
But it's not as easy when the information is reversed, when white is bad and black is good.
Left. Right.
In
right,
rapid succession,
left,
she
left,
incorrectly links the word joy with the white face rather than the word good.
Left.
Then she incorrectly links the white face with the word good.
I don't know.
You held it together almost to the end.
Betsy's test shows a preference for white. She offers another explanation for what it means.
Is it because I see black people bad, or is it because I'm incapable of saying I see myself as bad?
There would be many people who would say, what's wrong with showing a preference for your own race?
In some contexts, it's actually illegal to do so. In employment contexts, in college admissions.
But what does all this prove? Like the other participants, Jeff first took the test individually on a computer, and his test too revealed a preference for white. But he refused the subsequent studio test, saying he doesn't think the experiment reveals anything at all.
I think the test for a person like myself, who has some spatial difficulties and left-right difficulties, is questionable.
So you're questioning the test itself?
Yes, I have questions about the test.
Professor Banaji, Jeff is questioning your test.
Well, Jeff's experience is not unusual. Let's say you are having spatial difficulties, or let's say you've never used a computer before. It could easily have been the case that if that was the problem, that we could see a strong preference for black over white, but that didn't happen.
In fact, this experiment has passed scientific scrutiny. And the results of the professor's experiments have been published in leading psychological journals. Our results reflect the professor's findings.
Something like 79 or 80% of white Americans who take the test show a preference for white over black.
Likewise, 5 of the 7, 71% of whites we tested show a preference for their own race.
All my working life, I only remember 2 times where I didn't hear on a daily basis at work the N-word. Like, I hear it every day, and it's just pervasive.
Only one white test taker, Mike, a carpenter, showed a preference for blacks.
Oh, that's interesting.
Food for thought. It is food for thought. What do you make of it?
I don't know how that came out that way.
This result is also consistent with the professor's findings. Just 17% of whites show a preference for African Americans. And all of these results occurred even though we put this test to its toughest challenge, testing men and women with a dedicated commitment to racial equality. People like Jeff, who once marched with Martin Luther King Jr.
All of those things tell me who I am as a person.
And Rhonda, an attorney.
I've spent the last 10 to 15 years being a civil rights lawyer and trying to do some good in the world, but that doesn't make me immune from my own internal prejudices, and I think I just need to work on that. I mean,
many of the people in this group are people with impeccable credentials in terms of race relations.
It's not telling us that these are the wrong people for the jobs they're doing. The way they operate in their jobs is awake, conscious, intentional, deliberate.
The professors say this test also reveals something else, something more subtle and insidious, that even unconscious racial biases may have real-world consequences. For instance, do white teachers unconsciously favor white students?
Right.
Jennifer teaches 6th grade.
Right.
For Jennifer, it was difficult to associate good words with black faces.
Jennifer, your score came out as a strong preference for white. Do you believe that those unconscious attitudes for whites affects your teaching?
I would hope not. I don't view people by what they look like. I view people on what
they can do and what they feel and how they are.
Jennifer says she consciously strives to treat students equally. But psychologists say all teachers should be aware that hidden biases can still seep through.
If the teachers have different expectations, it's going to be difficult for that teacher to prevent this from influencing various subtle ways of communicating that.
And if there are real consequences when white teachers favor white students, there could be catastrophic consequences when a police officer has a bias against a black citizen.
If a police officer is going to shoot 0.2 of a second faster at an African American than a European American, well, that could be a matter of life and death.
So you're saying just because it may be a quick response doesn't make it any less dangerous, maybe even more so?
Maybe even more so.
I'm somewhat naive.
And given these stakes, they say, it's important to know our internal preferences, especially since they're often not what we expect.
I deal with a lot
As revealing as the results are with the white test takers, the biggest surprise is yet to come.
You're flabbergasted.
I'm flabbergasted.
But what happens when African Americans take the same test?
Left, right.
A different perspective when How Biased Are You continues. You've seen what happened when some white Americans took a test designed to reveal hidden bias. Many of those people, especially those who have worked for civil rights, were surprised to learn that they showed a preference for whites. But what happens when you give the same test to African Americans? The results, as you'll see, are just as revealing. Once again, Sarah James.
Left.
Joan is a sales and marketing consultant.
Right.
She makes it through the first part of the test, linking negative words like failure with the left box, which has bad and a black face, and positive words like peace with the right box, which has good and a white face.
This is African American faces and pleasant words on the right.
But even for an African American test taker, it becomes much more challenging when the information is switched, when black is associated with good and white is associated with bad.
Didn't get halfway through. We'll start over. Think about the instructions just for a second.
Right for good, left for bad.
Ready?
After 2 attempts, Joan still can't make it to the end.
I've done it again.
Where would you imagine prior to taking this test that you might fall?
I think I would fall in the range of strong.
Strong preference for African American.
Correct.
Would you be surprised then, Joan, if I said that your test showed a slight preference for whites?
Yes, I would be.
Does it shock you?
Yes.
You're flabbergasted.
I'm flabbergasted.
And Joan isn't alone. Shabam, a rap artist, also shows a preference for whites, in spite of what he expects.
I feel like I have a preference towards African American.
And when it shows in the test that, in fact, it's a strong preference for whites?
I don't know. I mean, this white president, there was never a black president, you know?
But what about Dennis? He's the leader of a civil rights organization. According to his test in the studio, Dennis is neutral, but his individual computer test showed a preference for white. His response?
Not surprised.
No.
Because I have no idea what influenced that factor at all. All we had in images were whites through the type of media outlets that we were exposed to during my age generation. And that was a constant reinforcement over and over again.
Of the African Americans the professors have tested, 42% show a preference for whites. A large number, especially when you recall that only 17% of whites show a preference for blacks. This phenomenon has been documented before. In 1949, psychologist Kenneth Clark demonstrated that African American children preferred white dolls over black dolls. And 50 years later, after Black Power, civil rights, and affirmative action, this test suggests that not much has changed.
Left, right.
And what of the other African Americans we tested? Heather is an assistant district attorney. On the first part of the test, she easily links negative words like terrible and a white face with the left box. But then the information in the boxes is switched. This time the black face is paired with the word bad. Heather has noticeable difficulty and can't finish. She showed a strong preference for African Americans, and her pride was unabashed.
Your test scores showed a strong preference for blacks. So it was reassuring to you.
Yes. Not that I need a test to tell me that, because I know that when I wake up, I'm an African American woman, no matter what. It just made me feel more comfortable knowing that I've embraced my culture.
I see myself as a
The same sentiment and score was shared by Patricia, a high school teacher and psychologist.
It pleases me, but I work hard at being fair, and I think
Patricia describes herself as having two selves, sort of a double consciousness, the person she is at work and the person she is at home.
how I raise my child, the things I inculcate in her, are not the same way I teach my high school math class, one of which is all white right now. I would not supply a nursery school I was running with all black dolls, but I will supply my house with all black dolls.
Randolph, a high school music teacher, also had difficulty making associations between white faces and good words. His test showed a preference for his own race.
Does it concern you at all that you have a strong preference for African Americans?
No, because that doesn't mean I'm a racist. Does that score mean that I do not like European Americans? No. Is my subconscious aware of the condition that African Americans are in this country at this particular point? My conscious is.
According to the research, 48% of African Americans have a preference for their own race. That may sound like a lot, but remember, according to the professors, 79% of whites prefer their race.
That's exactly what it comes out as, a strong preference for blacks, and it doesn't...
The professors note that there's a difference in reactions between blacks and whites when they find out they have a preference for their own race. You could say it's pride or prejudice. What blacks consider a badge of healthy self-esteem, many whites regard as an embarrassing revelation.
It reflects an awareness on the part of white Americans that their culture has imposed the quality of goodness on their own group, which allows them to like their own group.
Is it a double standard, though?
It is a double standard if you believe that the world is an equal place.
Many of those we interviewed, both black and white, told us they believe people should be judged by their actions.
All of us, I think, would be curious on how we got to a particular score level, but at the same time, I think we have to analyze what we do in our actions towards other individuals.
It's what you do now with yourself and what you do with your time on racial questions.
But these aren't just words and faces on a screen, not just abstract images. This test suggests that when it comes to the potent question of race, our subconscious is making decisions every day, decisions that in real time, in real life, have real consequences.
For the past 24 hours, you've had a chance to take this test online. Here are the results up till now. You can still take the test on our website at discovery.com. It'll take about 5 minutes, and maybe you'll learn something about your own bias. A different test involving people we'd all like to think are colorblind.
Is this a good or bad boy most of the time? Good boy.
The child's eye view, ahead on How Biased Are You? This next story involves some unusually forthcoming children. Good kids, all of them. Actually, our story is not so much about them as it is about a troubling sensibility that can seep in and infect the youngest and most innocent among us. Here's Lynn Cannon.
Oh, I'm sorry about that, man. This is... Help! Help! Hey, what you talking about, man? It's your bag.
Take it. Please don't kill me. I'm getting married.
Hey, I don't want your bag, man.
It's wacky, wicked humor for sure. But the movie Trading Places spoofs a real-life, all-too-familiar attitude, prejudice, making negative assumptions based on racial stereotypes. But is prejudice something learned from our parents, society, or is it something we're born with?
I don't think you're born with it. I believe it's something that's learned.
For some children, perhaps they do learn this in their home, but I think other children, they probably learn it through subtle messages that children begin to pick up on in society.
Psychologists Elaine Jones and Janet Schofield are social scientists who say prejudice is commonplace, something found in even the most well-intentioned families, and taking root early. But can one actually demonstrate or prove it exists in children? They say yes. Schofield and Jones point to a 20-year body of research involving kids of all ages. In one study, they are shown drawings like this with various scenarios. It's up to the youngsters to tell the experimenter just what they think is happening. Some of the drawings are identical. The only difference is that some situations, the actors, as researchers call them, are white, and in other drawings, they're black. Experimenters wanted to know, would kids interpret scenes differently when skin color varies?
So in this test, if there's a general perception that blacks are more aggressive, then the interpretation will be that blacks are being more aggressive in a certain situation.
That's right. You'll be more likely to say, oh, that was an aggressive behavior than if it's a white child.
For example, is the boy at the top of the stairs trying to stop the smaller one from falling? Or instead, might he have pushed the little boy down? To the child being tested, does that depend on whether the bigger boy is black or white? Similarly, is this boy picking up money in order to return it to the other boy, or is he stealing it? What if he is black? Would kids really tailor their interpretations to the actor's race? And at what age does it start? To find out for ourselves, we asked Dr. Jones, along with a team of her graduate students from St. Louis University, to attempt to show some examples with preschoolers, kids ranging in age from 3 to 5. We didn't want to interfere with the testing in any way, so we placed 4 unmanned concealed cameras here in the testing area, including one here behind these giant toy blocks. Also, we placed a camera here behind this dollhouse and 2 cameras up there in the ceiling. We also placed a camera over here behind this one-way mirror. Finally, we placed several TV monitors in another room, so we, along with the children's parents, could watch the testing. The children came from schools in the St. Louis area, some of which were integrated, others not. Each child spent about 10 minutes with an experimenter, usually examining 4 pairs of drawings. Meet 5-year-old Erin, a nice kid with well-intentioned parents. They say she's had little exposure to children of other races. Even so,
I don't think we've ever biased her towards any particular race. I hope.
But watch as Erin puzzles through portions of her test, including the staircase drawings. Remember, the scenarios are identical in every way, except for the color of the bigger boy.
What do you think is happening in this picture? What do you think this boy's doing here?
He's trying to catch him.
Okay, think he's trying to catch him? Okay. You mean he's trying to help him to stop falling? Or you think he's trying to push him down?
I think he's trying to help him from falling.
Okay. Is this a good or bad boy most of the time? Good boy.
Now listen as Erin is asked how she perceives the same situation when the boy at the top of the stairs is black instead of white.
What's happening in this picture? What's this boy here doing?
Pushing him down.
Pushing him down? Why do you think that boy's pushing him down? Why do you think that boy's doing that?
I don't know.
You don't know? Is this a good or bad boy? Most of the time.
Bad.
Think he's bad?
I was surprised.
I was surprised.
We know what we've done intentionally to not create a bias in her, so I don't know where that would come from.
We watched the test demonstrated on over 20 St. Louis preschoolers who are white. But in the end, we saw just 2 examples of the effect signaling prejudice, both amongst the 5-year-olds. So we wondered if we might possibly see more of the effect in older children, say 7 to 9-year-olds. So we went to Verona, New Jersey, a town like so many, one that discourages discrimination, applauds diversity, but is largely white. Dr. Schofield served as experimenter. While many of the children had this kind of reaction,
Or it's like the first picture that you showed me.
Okay.
But he's a different color, but that doesn't matter at all, because it doesn't matter what you look on the outside. It matters what you look on the inside.
we also began to see something else. Watch as 9-year-old Laura analyzes the two identical money drawings. First, the one involving a black actor.
The boy by accident is dropping his money and the man is stealing it.
But the actions of the actor picking up the money take on another meaning when he is white.
And what's he going to do with the money when he's picked it up?
He's probably going to give it to him.
Why do you think he's going to do that?
Maybe because he thinks it's not right to take money from other people.
Now listen as 7-year-old Nicholas makes judgments based on the actor's facial expressions.
I know you said this boy is happy to find it because he might keep it or he might give it back to him. If you had to guess, what do you think that boy's going to do?
He does look like he has a smirk on his face to be like happy because he wants to take it.
Remember, this face is exactly the same as the face in the companion picture, only the skin colors are different.
What do you think this kid is going to do?
Maybe give it back to us.
Uh-huh. And why do you think so?
Because the way he looks.
Uh-huh. Okay. What about the way he looks makes you think he's going to give it back?
This kid looks different and he looks more serious.
So Nicholas perceives this face as serious and this one as wearing a smirk. While Nicholas's mother can't account for her son's varying interpretations,
he's never said anything mean about anybody that was different from him.
Dr. Schofield says she's heard this brand of interpretation before and believes one likely explanation is racial stereotyping.
I think the issue of law-breaking or theft is another case where there are stereotypes that are widely shared that would make this kind of linkage seem natural or come very easily to a child.
Could we in some way be over-interpreting what these kids are doing? Could it be the order of the pictures that they're seeing? Could it be they're changing their answers because they just feel like changing it because they see the same picture again?
I think that's a very important question, but what we're seeing here is a demonstration of a very well researched phenomenon. Aggressive behaviors, when they're engaged in by black actors, are seen as different than those that are engaged in by white actors.
While the testing does not definitively prove prejudice in any given child, among the 7 to 9-year-olds, we saw 3 of 13 who seemed to display some bias in their interpretations. Though not a scientific study, that's more than 20%. But in one scientific study involving drawings, the numbers are even more pronounced. More than half the children tested showed some kind of bias. But what happens when the same tests are given to African American children? Do they differentiate between black and white actors? The answer is not in the way you might think. Here, 5-year-old Jocelyn is looking at the white actor picking up the money.
So is he going to give the money back to that little boy, or is he going to keep the money for himself?
Give it back.
But look what happens when the black actor is picking up the money.
Is he going to give the money back to him, or is he going to keep the money for himself?
Keep the money for himself.
He's going to keep the money for himself? Okay.
Because he has a little smile on his face. It seems like he won't give it back.
Oh, he has that little smile on his face, so he won't give it back.
There are groups of black children who are particularly young, usually 3 and 4 and 5, 6-year-olds, who might in fact make more negative moral judgments of black story characters.
Even if those negative images and perceptions are of themselves or of their own race.
Of their own race, that's right.
But the experts say with increasing age, black kids become less likely to buy into the stereotypes. Doctors Jones and Schofield say harboring some degree of prejudice does not mean that a child is going to evolve into a racist who actively discriminates. But it's not something that should be ignored. They say that prejudice can play out in kids by influencing the types of people they pick for friends, whom they avoid, how they treat a neighbor or a stranger, and it can create misunderstandings that can lead to genuine conflict.
Oftentimes, parents say to us, I haven't said anything to my child because I haven't noticed that they've acted like they have a bias or that they're prejudiced.
My sense is that race is an important enough characteristic in the society that if the parent doesn't talk with them about it and try to structure the ideas that they're developing about it, then it goes on without the benefit of the parent's input.
We know that prejudice is all around us. Now the question is, what can we do about it?
I talk to parents who will constantly say to me, well, you know, I'm not a bigot. I don't understand where my child gets this.
Recipes for change. Next on How Biased Are You? Finally tonight, we've explored the problems of prejudice, but where are the solutions? It would be naive to suggest there's an easy fix. But there are people who believe society can change, even if it happens one person at a time.
Prejudice. Wrote a song about it? Like to hear it? Here it goes.
As we've seen, talking about prejudice can challenge beliefs.
Flabbergasted.
And reverse assumptions.
Just because I'm young and I'm black doesn't mean I committed any crimes.
But how do we go beyond dialogue? As Director of Education for the Anti-Defamation League, Carol Stern LaRosa has some practical advice on unlearning bias. First, remember that no one is bias-free.
I believe all of us have some biases. People are most comfortable with what's most familiar to them.
Parents should introduce children to the unfamiliar early.
Research shows us that by 18 months, a child can differentiate between the toy they want and the toy you're handing them, which means that by 18 months they can tell who you are versus who I am. So it really is never too young to start to say to your children, people are different.
Make sure your school teaches what you preach.
You should ensure that your school has anti-bias education. If you want your child prepared to join the work world today, he or she must know how to work with a diverse workplace.
Back up your words with actions.
So I talk to parents who will constantly say to me, well, you know, I'm not a bigot. I don't understand where my child gets this. And then we start to look at their lives and we find that the only people different than them that their child ever sees them interacting with are on a payroll. It's the person cleaning their house. It's the person decorating their house. It's the person doing the lawn. It's the grocery store delivery person. It's not a person who comes to dinner. It's not a person who goes to the movies with them.
Ask someone you trust to check your own record.
A bigotry buddy, a person you give permission to say to you, you know what, you're doing it right now. What you think you're saying and what's being heard is different.
As with any lesson, learning how to reduce bias and prejudice takes time and practice.
We are only going to get good at it if we practice it. And we're only going to be able to practice it if we learn it. And we're only going to learn it if we make a conscious choice to do so.
How Biased Are You is the first program in the Discovery Channel's year-long public initiative called Hate and Violence, No Simple Answers. We invite you to join us again on April 14th to learn more about hate in America, an evening that will include a live town hall meeting and 3 eye-opening special reports on the violence that prejudice can cause. Until then, I'm Forrest Sawyer.
Would you lie if you thought you could get away with it?
Did you take the money out of the envelope?
It was an empty envelope.
Would you help the woman on the right before the woman on the left simply because of her looks?
Oh, you're so strong. Thank you so much.
Would you steal to impress other people?
They're breaking into the shop.
In the right circumstances, Psychologists say you're capable of all of these acts, and worse. In a series of original experiments, this program will test human behavior to its limits, with cameras rolling.
What people say they would do is often a far cry from what they actually do when put in the crucible of human behavior.
After seeing how people behave in the human zoo, you'll never look at life the same way again. In a lifetime, we encounter thousands of people, and whether we know it or not, we judge them instantly. Every waking minute, we're interpreting the detail of human behavior. A glance, a gesture, a smile. We're all amateur psychologists. We have to be. Psychologists say much of what we do as individuals is designed to influence what others think of us. But how important are